Well, welcome to episode of our podcasts. Now, for this episode, I was going to do the whole film, but I thought, actually, this is going on a bit. It's about 30, well, actually, it's longer than that. It's about an hour. So what I'm going to do a short excerpt from the SHEDtalk that we held. And the SHEDtalk was on heaven and hell. And it was very interesting, if I say so myself, as we talked about some of the concepts, some of the ideas of what heaven and hell are and what they're like. And towards the end of that conversation, of the SHEDtalk, we discussed, I guess the key question that people have is, well, who's going where? How do you get in to these places? And I guess that's an interesting point. It wasn't really the whole drive of the conversation, but the SHEDtalk concept, we've been doing these for several years now, and they start with a kind of short introduction to a theme. This wasn't as short as it should have been, but it went on a bit, and then we have an open discussion, which is very hard to capture on camera, so we haven't got the conversation afterwards so much, but there is an extended version of the whole talk which is also available on the YouTube channel. So this is the edited version, and what I've done is I've taken out particularly the element where we talked about hell, because for some reason as human beings we seem more interested in the hellish bit than we do in the heavenly bit. So here's a very short introduction to what the hell is hell. Dance through it. So in the Old Testament you don't have hell, you have a place called Sheol or Sheol. Now that's a Hebrew word, and it's not hell, and Sheol is actually the underworld. So for the Jewish people at that time, they thought there was a kind of shadowy cave under the ground that everyone, when you died, you went and inhabited there. And if you come to the lecture by Matt Arnold a bit later, he will talk to you about some of the portals that are in the geography of the land. But the idea of Sheol wasn't, there's no fire in Sheol, it's just cold and grey, and that's it. And that's the afterlife. And for most of the Old Testament, that's the afterlife that people thought. That's what they thought it was. When you died, that's everyone goes to Sheol. Yeah, that's it. Then we get to the New Testament, and the New Testament starts to get a bit more involved. So in the New Testament, you have three words that get translated as hell. Now, one of them is Hades. Now, sometimes in translations now, they'll use the word Hades. This is why, and you'll know we've come across this issue on other areas when we look at the Bible. It's partly about the translation. So you can say, well, the Bible says this. Well, does it? Because words get translated. So some people will translate Hades as hell. But the word isn't hell. The word that's used is clearly Hades. And as we just said, Hades is Greek underworld run by the god Hades with the dog and everything else. So when they translate the word hell, they're bringing a different understanding, or they're painting over that word, because they knew all the contemporary readers would have known what Hades was. There is also in the New Testament, have you come across Gehenna? Gehenna is another word that you get in Greek. That's the Greek version. And Gehenna is, again, sometimes translated, or very often translated, as hell. So it could be either of these words being used when you read the word hell in the Bible, but they're very different places. So if you're reading it in the Greek and you saw the word Hades, you'd think, oh, Hades. If you saw the word Gehenna, you think, oh, Gehenna. Now, Gehenna is likely to be based on a valley in Israel, where in ancient times, in the Old Testament, there was the worship of the god Moloch, and child sacrifices took place, and it became basically a place of terror, and a place of horror, and a place of fire. So when people talk about Gehenna, that's the kind of imagery they're using, and over time, before the time of Jesus, the Jewish thought had kind of developed the idea of Gehenna into this place of punishment and purging. So it had started to arrive, the flaming idea had started to develop in the thought of God's people, but it hadn't actually been finalised by this point. So they're still talking about Hades, they're still talking about Gehenna, and they also talk about Sheol every now and then. And also, to make things a bit more confusing, You also have this place that gets a mention, Tartarus. Have you seen? Anyone heard of Tartarus? Yes. So Tartarus pops up just once. I think it's in one of the books of Peter. Tartarus again is a Greek hell. It's a Greek version of hell. Now, don't know the Greek origins of Tartarus. Who was thrown into Tartarus? Do you know?
Yeah, God of War, God of War.
See, the God of War game would be based on this. So there's lots of games now. There's loads of games that are based on some of these characters and places. So Tartarus was a place where the Titans, who are the kind of ancient Greek gods, were thrown into for punishment. And then as the Greek mythology developed, other people started getting thrown in as well. So Tartarus was also a place of suffering and punishment that the gods generally were thrown into, although some mortals did get thrown in. So none of those three, Gehenna, Tartarus, Hades, are Christian as such. The Christian's language started, or the Christian Bible started using them, but the actual concept, the ideas, are from Greek mythology or from Jewish thinking. So, that's interesting stuff, isn't it? And what's interesting is how language affects how we view things. So the words that we use, they colour how we understand the word. And then the image that gets associated with places then colours the word. And a classic example of this is inferno, because infernal means the lower kind of reaches, the lower regions. But it's become now, when we talk about infernal or an inferno, we always talk about fire, aren't we? And unless I've got my Latin wrong, which is possible because I did fail Latin many, many years ago. But the word infernal has become associated with fire. And that's because the infernal regions of hell, which is kind of early Christian thinking, post-biblical, but early Christian thinking, and probably into the medieval period, actually, the early medieval period when there's all Dante and all that stuff. I'm not exactly sure where it was. I should have researched this more, shouldn't I? I should have spent more time on that than I did on editing videos. Anyway, that's another matter. So the word infernal now is associated with fires, but it doesn't mean fire. The root of the word doesn't mean fire. So our kind of imagery of our hell's a place full of fire, which is what we've kind of been educated to think. We then, or the word infernal is associated with it, and then the two they conflate, and then they feed each other. And that's how we have ended up with this idea of heaven and hell that is very current now. And then Hollywood feeds it more, and then people just think, well, that's what the church says. And the church doesn't dispute it. I mean, one of the reasons we do the Shed Talks, and this talk in particular, was to try and make the point that the popular view is not the biblical view. You can think hell's like that if you want. No one's saying you can't think like that. Think what you want. I don't care. As long as you don't go around hurting people, think what you want. But don't say it's the Christian understanding. The man with the fork, someone put in the one of the conversations, though I don't believe in the man with the fork. Well, neither do I. In fact, neither probably do the vast majority of followers of Jesus. They accept the imagery and maybe laugh about it, but actually within the church itself, the man with the fork, the pitchfork, is not even faintly biblical. Anyway, that's one point. But the other point I guess I'd like to make, and do watch the whole chat. If you find this area interesting, do watch the full talk, and also come and see, or if it's already happened, watch the talk on the biblical afterlife, which hopefully will appear on this channel as well. A guy called Matt Arnold's coming in, who's a bit of an expert on this, and he will trace the imagery of hell and heaven right from the Old Testament and the afterlife all the way through to Revelation, and he will track that and take us through that journey of thought that's been developed. And I've heard this talk before. It's very interesting and very enlightening. But the other thing, I guess, the main thing I guess I'd like to draw out from this Shed Talk is the question that I don't know that everyone's bothered about it so much these days, but it does bother some people, is that well, who's going where? Who's, do you know? What can you do? How do you get into heaven? Now, my first point is that it's none of our business. It's not ours to decide. So Christians that go and go, well, you're going to go to heaven or you're going to go to hell. It's nothing to do with you, mates. You're not calling the shots. You're not the gatekeeper of God's kingdom. It's Jesus. So you always go back as a follower of Jesus. You go back. What did Jesus say? What did Jesus say? Who did he say was getting in and who wasn't getting in? Well, then you look at his stories. And he tells an amazing story, which I won't read, but I'll tell you it briefly. Well, he tells several amazing stories, so I suggest you look them up. But he tells a story about the end of time, and all of the nations are gathered before God. They're standing there on this great plain, and the Son of Man is seated on the throne. And he calls them up, and he says, come to me, you that are blessed, and come and enjoy the kingdom, enter the kingdom. Because when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was ill, you looked after me. When I was in prison, you visited me. And all the righteous people say to him, did we? When did we do that? We've never, and get this, we've never really seen you before. We've never done that for you. And Jesus says, and then the Son of Man says, well, whenever you did it for the least important of these, you did it for me. And then he says to the other ones, now you get lost, you lot. You're off to the left. The goats are put on the left. Because when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was cold, you didn't keep me warm. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was sick or in prison, you didn't visit me. You basically didn't give up monkeys about me. And they'll say to him, well, we that wasn't us. If we'd seen you, we would have helped you. We definitely would have done. We know, we would help you. Why wouldn't we help you? And Jesus says, well, whenever you didn't help other people who needed help, then you didn't help me. Whenever you ignored those people, you ignored me. So get off, get away to your eternal punishment, which is one of the ideas of hell being developed. And what's fascinating about this story and several other stories was whenever Jesus talks about hell, I think this is right, I must check it, because I regularly say I think this is right, but I must check it. Whenever Jesus talks about hell and punishment, it's always in the context of justice and compassion and kindness and the state of your heart. It's never, well, do you believe in me? It's never, well, did you go to church? Did you sign up to these doctrinal statements? It's always, did you look after people? Did you love? That's the ticket. In here. Who goes to heaven? That's what you got to work on. Thanks for watching. You can watch the full talk elsewhere, I say, and there'll be an even fuller talk available soon. So God bless. Take care. Take care of your heart. And I'll see you soon.